History has seen kings with massive armies, emperors born into royal bloodlines, dynasties that ruled for centuries, but very few men changed the fate of an entire continent through pure ambition alone. And one of them was Napoleon Bonaparte. He wasn't born a king, he wasn't supposed to rule France, and he definitely wasn't supposed to terrify every major monarchy in Europe. But somehow, a young outsider from a small Mediterranean island rose through chaos, war, and revolution, and came closer than almost anyone in history to dominating all of Europe. At the height of his power, kings feared him, armies collapsed before him, entire nations were forced to surrender, and for a moment, it looked like nothing could stop him. But the strange thing about power is this: the higher someone rises, the more dangerous the fall becomes. Because Napoleon didn't just fight enemies on battlefields, he fought ambition, ego, time, and eventually, the consequences of believing he could never lose. This is the story of how one man transformed France, reshaped Europe, and built an empire so powerful that the world still studies it more than 200 years later. A story filled with war, political manipulation, massive victories, devastating mistakes, and one final downfall that shocked the world. But before we begin, if you enjoy deep history documentaries like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Let's go back to the beginning. Before Europe feared him, Napoleon Bonaparte was just a boy from an island most powerful people barely cared about. He was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, shortly after France took control of it. And from the very beginning, Napoleon grew up caught between two worlds. To the French elite, he was an outsider, not fully French, not important, not someone expected to rise very far. Even his accent made him stand out. At military school in mainland France, other students mocked the way he spoke. They mocked his background, his appearance. Most people in that situation would try to fit in. Napoleon didn't. Instead, he withdrew into something else: observation, discipline. While other students socialized, Napoleon studied military history for hours. Ancient conquerors fascinated him, especially men like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. Not because he admired power alone, but because he saw what power could do, how one individual could reshape entire nations. And somewhere deep down, Napoleon began believing something dangerous, that he was destined for more than ordinary life. But ambition alone means nothing without opportunity. And in the late 1700s, France was becoming the perfect place for ambitious men. Because beneath the surface, the country was falling apart. The monarchy was weak. The economy was collapsing. Food shortages created anger in the streets. And the divide between ordinary citizens and the wealthy elite kept growing wider. People were frustrated, desperate, and eventually, explosive. Then came the French Revolution. And suddenly, the old system that had controlled France for centuries began collapsing in real time. Kings lost authority, nobles lost protection, and chaos spread across the country. But chaos creates something unusual: opportunity. For most people, the revolution was terrifying. For Napoleon, it was a ladder, because revolutions destroy old rules. And when old rules disappear, ambitious people can rise faster than ever before. Napoleon quickly proved himself inside the French military, not because he was physically intimidating, not because he came from wealth, but because he understood strategy at a level that shocked people around him. He moved thought-adapted faster. And unlike many generals of the time, Napoleon didn't fight wars like rigid traditions. He fought dynamically, aggressively, almost unpredictably. One early moment changed everything. During the Siege of Toulon in 1793, Royalist forces supported by the British controlled the city. French revolutionary forces struggled to retake it. Then Napoleon proposed an artillery strategy so effective. It completely shifted the battle. The city fell, and suddenly, military leaders began paying attention to the young officer nobody had cared about before. Napoleon was only in his 20s, but he had already learned something critical. Victory creates visibility, and visibility creates power. From there, his rise accelerated rapidly. Promotions came quickly, political connections grew stronger, and more importantly, people began associating Napoleon with success. In unstable times, success becomes magnetic. France itself remained deeply unstable after the revolution. Executions, political violence, economic uncertainty, fear. The government struggled to maintain control while enemies surrounded France from all sides. And once again, war created opportunity. In 1796, Napoleon was given command of the French army in Italy. Many expected little from him. The army was poorly supplied, exhausted, and demoralized. Napoleon looked at them and reportedly said, "Soldiers, you are hungry and poorly clothed. but I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. It wasn't just motivation, it was psychological warfare, because Napoleon understood something many leaders miss. People fight harder when they believe they are part of something bigger. And soon, against expectations, he started winning. Again and again. His campaigns in Italy stunned Europe. Armies larger than his were defeated through speed, surprise, and relentless pressure. Suddenly, this young general wasn't just another officer anymore. He was becoming a legend. Newspapers praised him. Citizens admired him. Soldiers became fiercely loyal to him. And perhaps most importantly, Napoleon himself started believing his own myth. That belief would become one of his greatest strengths, and eventually, one of his greatest weaknesses. Because military victories don't just build confidence, they build ambition, and Napoleon's ambition was growing faster than anyone around him realized. He no longer wanted influence. He wanted control, not just over armies, not just over France, but potentially over Europe itself. By the late 1790s, France had a problem. Actually, several problems. The revolution had overthrown the old monarchy, but it hadn't created stability. Governments rose and collapsed quickly. Political factions fought constantly. Corruption spread through the system, and ordinary people were exhausted. France had removed a king, but it still hadn't found control. And during moments like that, societies often begin looking for the same thing: a strong figure who promises order. At exactly the same time, Napoleon Bonaparte was becoming more famous with every victory. His campaigns in Italy had transformed him into a national hero. Newspapers celebrated him. Soldiers admired him. Citizens talked about him like he was larger than life. And Napoleon understood something very important. Military success alone doesn't create power. Public perception does. So while he won battles, he also built an image. Portraits were painted carefully. Stories exaggerated his brilliance. Victories were highlighted. Failures minimized. Even then, Napoleon understood propaganda before most modern leaders even used the word. To the public, he wasn't just a general anymore. He was becoming a symbol. But symbols can become dangerous to governments, especially weak ones. At the time, France was controlled by a political system known as the Directory, and almost nobody trusted it. The economy remained unstable. Political violence continued, and many feared the country could collapse back into chaos at any moment. Meanwhile, across Europe, foreign monarchies still viewed revolutionary France as a threat. War remained constant, and once again, Napoleon kept delivering victories. Then came the Egyptian campaign. In 1798, Napoleon launched an expedition to Egypt. Officially, the goal was strategic to weaken British influence and threaten trade routes. But for Napoleon, it was something more. Legacy. He admired ancient conquerors deeply, especially Alexander the Great, and Egypt carried symbolism, mystery, history, power. At first, the campaign looked impressive. French forces won major land battles. Napoleon presented himself almost like a modern Caesar entering the ancient world. But beneath the image, problems were growing. The British Navy, led by Horatio Nelson, destroyed much of the French fleet during the Battle of the Nile. Suddenly, Napoleon's army was stranded. The campaign became increasingly difficult. And politically, the situation back in France was changing fast. The Directory was losing control. Confidence in the government was collapsing. People wanted stability more than ideology. Napoleon saw the opening immediately. In 1799, he returned to France. And despite the mixed results in Egypt, he was welcomed like a hero. That alone reveals how powerful his reputation had become. Because by this point, Napoleon wasn't surviving politically through facts. He was surviving through narrative. And soon, behind closed doors, conversations began. Political leaders, military allies, supporters inside government. The conclusion many reached was simple. France needed new leadership, and Napoleon intended to be at the center of it. Then came the coup. In November 1799, Napoleon participated in what became known as the Coup of 18 Brumaire. The operation was messy, tense, and at moments nearly failed completely. Legislators argued. Some accused Napoleon of trying to become a dictator. Crowds became chaotic. For a moment, the entire plan seemed close to collapse. But military loyalty changed everything. Soldiers entered, opposition dissolved, and the Directory fell. Just like that, the government of revolutionary France was gone. Officially, France became a consulate, but in reality, power had concentrated around one man. Napoleon became first consul, and although the title sounded temporary, the authority behind it was enormous. He moved quickly after taking control. Government structures were reorganized. The economy stabilized. Administrative systems became more efficient. Infrastructure improved. Many ordinary citizens actually welcomed the changes, because after years of chaos, Napoleon offered something people desperately wanted: order. And that's one of the most important patterns in history. People will often accept less freedom if they believe it brings more stability. Napoleon understood this perfectly, but he didn't rule through fear alone. That's what made him different from many dictators who came later. He ruled through competence, through momentum, through the belief that he could make France stronger. And for a while, he absolutely did. One of his biggest achievements came through the creation of the Napoleonic Code. It reorganized French law in ways that still influence legal systems today. It promoted merit over aristocratic privilege, strengthened property rights, standardized legal structures. In many ways, Napoleon wasn't just conquering territory, he was redesigning society. But while he modernized France internally, his ambition externally kept growing, because success can change people, and constant success changes them even faster. By the early 1800s, Napoleon no longer saw himself as merely protecting France. He saw himself as shaping Europe. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1804, inside the magnificent Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Napoleon prepared for a ceremony unlike anything France had seen since the monarchy. The crown was ready. The church was full. The world watched closely. And then, Napoleon did something unforgettable. Instead of allowing the Pope to crown him, he took the crown himself and placed it on his own head. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. He wasn't receiving power from tradition. He was declaring that his power came from himself. The outsider from Corsica had become Emperor of France, and now his ambition was no longer hidden. Because emperors don't think in terms of borders, they think in terms of empires. And across Europe, kings and monarchies were beginning to realize something terrifying. Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't just winning battles anymore. He was changing the balance of power across the entire continent. By the early 1800s, Europe was watching France with growing alarm, not because of revolution anymore, but because of one man. Napoleon Bonaparte had transformed himself from an unknown officer into Emperor of France. And now monarchies across Europe faced a terrifying possibility. What if he didn't stop there? Because Napoleon's victories weren't isolated anymore. They were becoming a pattern. Every time European powers formed alliances against him, he seemed to break them apart. Every time armies marched against France, Napoleon moved faster, struck harder, and adapted quicker than anyone expected. It wasn't just military strength that made him dangerous. It was momentum, and momentum in war can feel unstoppable. One of Napoleon's greatest strengths was how differently he approached battle. Traditional European armies often moved slowly, rigidly, predictably. Napoleon treated war almost like movement itself. Fast, flexible, aggressive. His armies marched enormous distances at shocking speed, forcing enemies to react instead of plan. And by the time opposing generals understood what he was doing, it was often already too late. Then came 1805, a year that would define his legend forever. A coalition of major European powers, including Austria and Russia, prepared to confront France. They believed Napoleon had finally expanded too far, that this time, numbers and coordination would defeat him. Instead, Napoleon delivered one of the most famous victories in military history, the Battle of Austerlitz. Often called the Battle of the Three Emperors, it brought together Napoleon, Tsar Alexander I of Russia, and Holy Roman Emperor Francis II. And Napoleon entered the battle with a plan so calculated, it felt almost theatrical. He intentionally appeared weaker than he actually was, allowing enemy forces to believe they had an advantage, drawing them into positions he wanted, manipulating their confidence. Then, at exactly the right moment, he attacked. French forces shattered the Allied armies with devastating precision. The victory stunned Europe. Entire coalitions collapsed. Political maps began changing, and Napoleon's reputation transformed from impressive to almost mythical. Across the continent, kings and emperors realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't just another ambitious ruler. This was someone capable of redesigning Europe itself. After Austerlitz, Napoleon's influence expanded rapidly. Territories were reorganized, new kingdoms created, old political systems weakened or destroyed, and wherever French influence spread, Napoleon introduced reforms. Feudal structures were dismantled in many regions. Legal systems modernized. Administrative efficiency improved. To some people, Napoleon looked like a conqueror. To others, he looked like the future. That contradiction became one of the most fascinating parts of his rise, because he brought both domination and transformation. But while Napoleon conquered externally, something else was happening internally. His confidence was evolving into certainty, and certainty can become dangerous, especially when someone stops believing they can fail. Still, Europe continued trying to stop him. Coalition after coalition formed against France, and again, Napoleon defeated them. In battles like Battle of Austerlitz, even powerful states like Prussia collapsed with shocking speed. Entire armies were overwhelmed. Governments panicked. Europe's traditional balance of power was crumbling. At the height of his power, Napoleon controlled or influenced enormous parts of the continent. From Spain to Central Europe, his presence shaped politics, warfare, and daily life. And everywhere he went, one message became impossible to ignore. The old Europe was dying, but empires create resistance, especially when they grow too powerful. Because for every territory Napoleon conquered, new resentment grew beneath the surface. Nationalism began rising in occupied regions. Local populations increasingly viewed French domination as foreign control rather than liberation. And slowly, the costs of constant expansion began accumulating. Meanwhile, one enemy remained especially difficult: Britain. Napoleon could dominate much of continental Europe, but Britain remained beyond his direct reach, protected by naval superiority, wealth, and global trade networks. After the devastating French naval defeat at the Battle of Trafalgar, led by Horatio Nelson, Napoleon realized invading Britain directly would be nearly impossible. So instead, he tried something different: economic warfare. Napoleon introduced the continental system, attempting to block European trade with Britain. The goal was simple: strangle the British economy, force them into weakness, and isolate them from the continent. But controlling trade across Europe proved far more difficult than controlling battlefields. Smuggling spread everywhere. Allies resisted restrictions. Economic strain increased, and slowly, cracks began forming inside Napoleon's empire. Because the larger an empire becomes, the harder it becomes to control. Still, Napoleon pushed forward. More campaigns, victories, expansion, and perhaps that was the beginning of the problem. Because by now, Napoleon wasn't just protecting France. He wasn't just defending power. He was chasing greatness itself. And greatness has a dangerous tendency. It convinces people that limits no longer apply to them. Soon, Napoleon would make a decision that historians still view as the turning point of his entire empire. A campaign so massive, so ambitious, that it would change everything. Not in France, Austria, Prussia, but deep inside Russia. And there, for the first time in years, Napoleon Bonaparte would encounter something he could not easily defeat: distance, winter, and the consequences of overreaching power. At the height of his power, Napoleon Bonaparte controlled more of Europe than almost anyone thought possible. Kings obeyed him. Allies feared disappointing him. Enemies struggled to stop him. And that may have been exactly the moment things started going wrong. Because history has a pattern. When leaders experience enough success, they begin believing success is inevitable. By 1812, Napoleon had defeated coalition after coalition. But one major power remained difficult to fully control: Russia. At first, Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I had cooperated uneasily after earlier agreements. But tensions kept growing. Russia increasingly resisted Napoleon's continental system, the economic blockade designed to weaken Britain. Trade restrictions hurt economies across Europe. Smuggling spread everywhere, and Russia no longer wanted to follow Napoleon's rules. For Napoleon, this wasn't just political disagreement, it was defiance. And empires built on dominance rarely tolerate defiance for long. So Napoleon made a decision that would become one of the most infamous military gambles in history. He would invade Russia, not with a small force, not with limited objectives, but with an army so enormous it shocked Europe. The Grande Armée, hundreds of thousands of soldiers from across Napoleon's empire, marched eastward in 1812. French, Polish, Italian, German troops. An army built from multiple nations under one command. At first, the scale alone looked unstoppable. Villages shook as columns of soldiers stretched for miles. Cannons rolled across roads endlessly. Flags moved like waves across the horizon. To many observers, it looked less like an invasion, and more like history itself moving forward. But Russia was different. Unlike previous enemies, Russian forces refused to engage Napoleon in the massive, decisive battle he wanted immediately. Instead, they retreated deeper into their own territory, again and again. As they withdrew, they destroyed supplies behind them. Food, shelter, resources, anything the French army could use. It became a strategy of distance and exhaustion. And the deeper Napoleon advanced into Russia, the more dangerous the situation became. Supply lines stretched further, communication slowed, resources diminished. Still, Napoleon continued forward, because by this point, turning back without victory may have felt impossible. Then came Battle of Borodino, one of the bloodiest battles of the Napoleonic Wars. The fighting was brutal, relentless, chaotic. Thousands died in a single day. Technically, Napoleon gained the battlefield, but it wasn't the decisive triumph he needed. Russian forces survived, and once again, retreated. Soon after, Napoleon entered Moscow, and for a brief moment, it seemed like victory had finally arrived. The ancient city, the symbolic heart of Russia, was now in his hands. But something was wrong. The city was nearly empty. Most civilians had already fled, and soon, fires began spreading across Moscow. Whether started intentionally or through chaos, the result was catastrophic. Large parts of the city burned. Food supplies disappeared. Shelter became limited. Napoleon had captured the city, but not the victory. And then came the real enemy, winter. As temperatures dropped, conditions became unbearable. Snow-covered roads, horses died, supplies vanished, soldiers weakened from hunger and exhaustion. The retreat from Moscow became a nightmare. Men froze while marching, equipment was abandoned, units collapsed into disorder, and Russian forces constantly attacked from the edges, striking weakened groups again and again. The Grande Armée, the massive force that entered Russia with overwhelming confidence, was slowly disintegrating. The scenes became horrific. Frozen bodies along roads, starving soldiers fighting over scraps of food, exhausted men unable to continue marching. For the first time in years, Napoleon looked vulnerable, and Europe noticed, because power often depends on perception, and the image of invincibility surrounding Napoleon had been shattered in the Russian snow. When the remnants of his army finally returned westward, the losses were staggering. Hundreds of thousands gone, not only from combat, but from starvation, disease, exposure, and exhaustion. The invasion that was supposed to reinforce Napoleon's dominance had instead weakened his empire catastrophically. And once weakness becomes visible, enemies move quickly. Across Europe, former rivals saw their chance. New coalitions formed. Countries that once feared Napoleon now sensed opportunity. The momentum that had once carried him toward domination was beginning to reverse. But even after disaster, Napoleon refused to surrender power easily, because men who build empires rarely accept decline calmly. He would continue fighting, continue leading armies, continue trying to reclaim control. But something fundamental had changed. Before Russia, Napoleon looked unstoppable. After Russia, he looked human. And for rulers built on victory, humanity can become dangerous. Because now, Europe wasn't just resisting him anymore. It was hunting him. After the disaster in Russia, the illusion was broken. For years, Europe had looked at Napoleon Bonaparte almost like a force of nature, unpredictable, relentless, impossible to stop. Now, for the first time, he looked beatable. And once powerful leaders appear vulnerable, something dangerous happens. Enemies become bolder, allies become uncertain, and fear begins changing sides. Across Europe, nations that had spent years losing to Napoleon saw a rare opportunity. Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia united once again, but this time felt different. This wasn't simply another coalition trying to slow Napoleon down. This was Europe trying to end him. And despite the catastrophic losses in Russia, Napoleon still refused to surrender. That alone says something remarkable about him. Most rulers would have collapsed politically after such a disaster. Napoleon instead rebuilt another army almost immediately. Young recruits filled the ranks. Factories accelerated production. New campaigns began. Because Napoleon still believed something that had defined his entire rise. That speed and confidence could overcome almost anything. And for a while, he still managed extraordinary victories. Even weakened, his tactical brilliance remained dangerous. But brilliance alone couldn't fully replace what had been lost. Too many experienced soldiers were gone. Too many resources exhausted. Too many nations now united against him. The pressure kept growing. Then came 1813, the Battle of Leipzig, often called the Battle of Nations. It became one of the largest battles Europe had ever seen before the modern era. And this time, Napoleon faced overwhelming opposition from multiple armies working together. The fighting was massive. Smoke covering fields, cannons firing endlessly, entire formations collapsing under pressure. Napoleon fought hard, but momentum, the same force that once powered his rise, was now moving against him. Eventually, French forces were defeated, and after Leipzig, the road into France itself began opening to enemy armies. For years, Napoleon had brought war to the rest of Europe. Now war was coming directly toward him. As coalition forces advanced closer to Paris, panic spread. Political support weakened rapidly. Many officials who once admired Napoleon now questioned whether staying loyal was worth the risk. And perhaps that was one of the cruelest realities of power. Support built on success often disappears during failure. In 1814, Paris fell. The emperor who had once dominated Europe now faced something almost unimaginable: defeat inside his own empire. Soon after, Napoleon abdicated. The man who crowned himself emperor, who reshaped Europe, who terrified kings, was forced to give up power, and then came exile. Napoleon was sent to the island of Elba, a tiny island compared to the empire he once controlled. The contrast felt almost surreal. Just a few years earlier, his influence stretched across enormous parts of Europe. Now he ruled over a small island under supervision. For many leaders, that would have been the end. But Napoleon was not built psychologically for ordinary defeat. Even in exile, he remained restless, watching Europe carefully, watching France carefully, and noticing something important. The new government in France was struggling. The restored monarchy lacked the energy and momentum Napoleon once commanded. Many soldiers still admired him deeply. Many citizens remembered the glory of his empire more than its costs. And slowly, an impossible idea began forming: return. Then, in 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba. What happened next almost sounds fictional. As he marched through France, soldiers sent to arrest him instead joined him. Entire units switched sides. Crowds gathered. Support grew rapidly. Legend was overpowering reality. And just like that, Napoleon returned to power. The period became known as the 100 Days. Europe reacted immediately, because by now, leaders across the continent understood something clearly. As long as Napoleon remained free, stability was impossible. Another coalition formed quickly. Another war began quickly. And once again, everything would come down to a single battle, a final confrontation that would determine whether Napoleon's story ended in restoration or collapse. Near the village of Waterloo, and there, the man who once came close to conquering Europe would face the battle that defined his legacy forever. By 1815, Europe had reached a conclusion. As long as Napoleon Bonaparte remained in power, there would never be peace. He had escaped exile, returned to France, reclaimed control with shocking speed, and once again, armies across Europe prepared for war. But this time felt different. Not because Napoleon had changed, but because Europe had. For years, nations had fought him separately, too slowly, divided, and uncertain. Now they understood something critical. If they failed again, Napoleon might rebuild everything. So the coalition moved quickly. British, Prussian, and Allied forces advanced toward Belgium, determined to stop him before he could fully regain momentum. Napoleon knew the danger immediately, because time, the force that once helped him rise, was now working against him. He needed victory, fast, decisive, overwhelming. And so, in June 1815, near the village of Waterloo, history narrowed toward a single battlefield. The weather itself seemed hostile. Heavy rain turned roads into mud. Cannons became harder to move. Troops exhausted themselves marching through difficult terrain. Still, Napoleon remained confident. Perhaps because confidence had carried him through impossible situations before. Perhaps because he genuinely believed his legend could still overpower reality. Facing him was the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, commanding British-led Allied forces. And somewhere nearby, Prussian armies were moving closer. Napoleon's plan depended on speed. Destroy Wellington's army before Prussian reinforcements could arrive. A familiar strategy. Divide enemies, strike quickly, win before coordination becomes overwhelming. At first, the battle remained uncertain. French attacks pushed hard against Allied positions. Smoke covered the battlefield. Cannons thundered endlessly. Entire formations disappeared into chaos. The fighting became brutal and exhausting. Mud, blood, confusion. Hours of relentless pressure. Napoleon committed wave after wave of attacks. Infantry advanced through heavy fire. Cavalry charges shook the battlefield. For moments, it seemed possible that he might still pull victory from the edge of disaster. But Waterloo was different from the battles that built his empire, because now, Europe had adapted to him. And slowly, the situation turned. Wellington's forces held their ground longer than Napoleon expected. Critical attacks failed to fully break Allied lines. Communication problems spread confusion. And then, the Prussians arrived. That moment changed everything. Fresh enemy forces entered the battle, while Napoleon's exhausted army was already struggling. Pressure mounted rapidly. French formations began collapsing. And for the first time in years, the emperor, who once terrified Europe, could no longer control the battlefield. Soon, retreat turned into disintegration. Soldiers fled. Units broke apart. The army that once symbolized unstoppable momentum was collapsing under combined pressure. Waterloo wasn't just a defeat, it was the end of an era. After the battle, Napoleon's political position became impossible to save. There would be no dramatic recovery this time, no return to power, no rebuilding another empire. Europe had decided his story needed to end permanently. Napoleon abdicated again, but unlike after Elba, this exile would be very different. He was sent far away to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean, a place isolated enough to make escape nearly impossible. And there, far from battlefields and empires, Napoleon spent the final years of his life. The contrast was extraordinary. The man who once commanded massive armies and reshaped Europe now walked the grounds of a distant island under constant supervision. But something fascinating happened after his fall. Defeat ended his empire, but it strengthened his legend. Because history remembers power differently than politics does. Some remembered Napoleon as a tyrant driven by endless ambition. Others saw him as a military genius, a reformer, a symbol of merit rising above aristocracy. And in many ways, he was all of those things at once. His influence didn't disappear after Waterloo. The Napoleonic Code continued shaping legal systems across countries. Military academies still study his campaigns today. Political leaders still analyze his rise to understand charisma, ambition, and power. Even the map of Europe itself was permanently altered by the wars he fought. And perhaps that's what makes Napoleon's story so compelling. Because it isn't only about conquest, it's about ambition without limits, about how quickly one individual can reshape the world during moments of chaos, and about the dangerous line between confidence and overconfidence. Napoleon once said, "Impossible is a word to be found only in the dictionary of fools." For much of his life, he seemed to prove that statement true, until reality finally imposed its own limits. And yet, even after defeat, even after exile, even after the empire collapsed, the name Napoleon Bonaparte never disappeared from history, because some people don't just live through history, they redefine it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And if there's another historical figure or empire you want us to cover next, let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.